Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
And welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. I am joined, this is Robert. I'm sitting in the host chair for a change, and I am joined by an extinguished group of gentlemen here with me. In no particular order, Dylan Holzmer. Want to say hi to everybody, Dylan?
Howdy, everybody.
And Evan Buck is also here today. Evan?
Hey, everyone. How's it going? It's your boy, Evan.
And Chris, I know you've got something.
Hi, good people.
There it is. We're official.
Yep. Can I just issue a quick correction? It's distinguished, not extinguished. I would hope we're not.
Okay, y'all are still alive.
I would hope we're not extinguished yet.
For a second, I thought you were doing that thing from Super Troopers where you like change a word and see if anyone notices.
There you go. See, occasionally.
Well, I got you. I got you.
He got me. So, hey, this is a second part to our episode that Jose Sanjurjo lives and does not get on an airplane, setting up a little bit different path in the Spanish Civil War. Chris, you want to catch everybody up where we are?
I'm going to try. So we talked a decent amount about the internal Spanish politics of it. Sanjurjo was going to be the leader of the nationalist. If he survives and lands, basically where we went is he gets a lot of support from Mussolini, not so much support from Hitler. And if Italy and Germany in this circumstance are not kind of pushed together and made friends by being on the same side of the Spanish Civil War, you still have the issue of Austria between them. Germany, once Hitler gets comfortable becoming expansionist, doesn't push for the Anschluss with Austria because the Austro-fascist regime is actually aligned with Italy, and he knows he'll actually get pushback there. So instead, he focuses east. He takes the Sudetenland and comes to an agreement with the Soviet Union to divide Poland. The issue is, in our timeline, that leads to World War II. It doesn't here because Germany hasn't been as aggressive as it has in our timeline. Specifically, the only territorial acquisition that Hitler has made has been the Sudetenland. What that means is Britain and France don't feel the need to issue their guarantee of independence to Poland. So when Germany and the Soviet Union take over Poland, there is not a reason for Britain and France to get involved. I mean, I think just to kind of remind everyone, at the beginning of the First World War, Britain stood on the sidelines because they threw up their hands and said, we don't actually have a formal alliance with anyone. We've never said any piece of paper that we're going to get involved. And the only thing that did it was the invasion of Belgium in 1914. So in this case, there's no Poland, but there's also no Second World War. And we talked around some of these things earlier at the end of the last podcast, and listening to it, I want to kind of firm everything up. Once Eastern Poland is occupied, the Soviet Union starts the Winter War with Finland. That happens the way it does in our timeline. And then in our timeline, they also took over a piece of Romanian territory called Bessarabia. And if you're looking for it today, it's Moldova. And to bring us up to the beginning of this podcast, we think that move right there would have been what triggers some form of fighting at the beginning of the 1940s. we're probably, we were just talking, maybe it's not called World War II or not called World War II yet, but because Germany gets so much of its oil supplies from Ploesti and from Romania, which admittedly is at the other end of the entire country of Romania, but Romania is not exactly that big. And Germany attacks the Soviet Union almost a little more than a year earlier. Probably we're thinking this happens in April, May 1940, which is important because in our timeline, many people blame the delay until June of 1940 for the failure to capture Moscow in December 1941. So is that a good recap, people?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's a pretty good recap, and also a little bit of forward looking that we didn't discuss last time.
Yep.
Right. So we've now established Germany's attacked. They're a year early.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going in. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is if it's a German-Russian war, there is no Western Front with a bunch of troops tied up in France, staring across the English Channel.
There's also no Battle of Britain.
Correct.
So the German Luftwaffe is, at least at the starting point, still very much a thing that is going to be, a significant player on the ground, especially against the Soviets.
And in the lead up to this war, we did not have the Nazi-Soviet pact, Molotov-Ribbentrop, actually occur. We basically just had Poland split up without a war declared by Germany against Poland happening. So I think that's actually really important, can't be understated, because we do not have a official position of, neutrality, no war, peace between these two empires. Instead, we have a shared land border in Eastern Europe between these two very powerful upstart nations. No treaty that has been signed between them, but no hostilities until the Soviets take over Bessarabia. And that is what we're having as the touching off point, the powder keg. The Balkans are featuring again as the powder keg of another possibly global conflict. Now, there's a reason we call this a possibly global conflict, as we've just been elucidating, is Britain under Chamberlain, because remember, Churchill is not in office yet, has really no reason to get involved. Neither does France. And Italy and Spain are kind of already doing their thing. Now, as we said in the lead up to this podcast, in the pre-podcast discussion, we said it wasn't really a alliance, but as Dylan said, it's like concepts of an alliance. They're on pretty friendly terms, but they're not in an actual formal alliance. And as I mentioned in the prior episode, SanjurWHO is probably going to be more likely palling around with the Carlists, trying to get his guys back on the throne in Spain. So we have some more internally focused things going on in Western Europe, and this conflict that erupts in Eastern Europe that may also change how another power is possibly drawn in or not drawn in. And I wanted to throw this to the open floor, but as we discussed also in the lead up, what is going to happen with Japan? Because with Japan, in our timeline, Germany and Japan were on opposite sides of World War I. And over the course of the next couple decades, there were significant incentives for them to be drawn together. And we also had the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. In this timeline, one of those three is not there, and that's Italy. So, gentlemen, I'm going to throw this out there for you guys to discuss. What do we think is going to happen with Japan once war breaks out between the Soviets and the Germans in early 1940?
Well, the first thing is in the Japanese military, and Chris reminded me very well of this. At this time frame, there were two schools of thought. The Japanese Navy wanted a southern, meaning they wanted Indochina, the Philippines, and all of that issued as the Japanese right or sphere of influence. The army was fighting for a northern movement, which was into Manchuria and moving up that way. And they were two competing pieces. And the army had sort of started moving in the north towards Russia anyway at that point, by the time this hits off. And at the same time, you have to remember the Southern became more intrinsic because, A, of the oil embargo, which only occurred because France fell in our timeline. So Japan ran into, Indochina quickly to grab the oil. The Dutch East Indies in particular is what they were looking at. All of those colonial powers are still in play down there. And so Japan really doesn't want to play. Chris, you want to pick it up from there?
So I do. We haven't planned this out. So I'm about to say something that I'm open to being challenged on, though. I don't think we just to kind of round out the Japanese position, they are heavily engaged already in China.
The rape of Nanking has already happened at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Manchuria has been taken over, I think.
Yeah,
right?
they've got Manchuria.
Manchuria is almost a 10-year puppet state at this point. That was in 1931 when they took it.
Mhm.
Northern China and a lot of coastal China is currently under Japanese occupation. They are slowly but surely wearing down the nationalist regime. They also have already lost 2 border skirmishes with the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
One in
Mhm.
Manchuria, one closer over towards Vladivostok.
Yeah.
But I think the Japanese land. One of the reasons in our time, the 2 reasons in our timeline that the Japanese took the go south strategy is, one, as Robert was just saying, it sure looks like the rich areas of Southeast Asia are up for grabs because their imperial powers have been occupied. In this case, they're not. And the other thing is, the Japanese army has China. They are already engaged in China, and they haven't won the war in China. And they're having a very hard time winning the war in China. One of the reasons that they were okay trying some of the other adventures they wound up doing is, even, if you look at what happened in the Pacific Theater, the United States had a Europe first policy, but if you look at the numbers of Japanese troops committed to the invasion of the Philippines, to Burma, to all of the islands, they were minuscule compared to the number of troops they had fighting in China. All of that leads to this. I don't think the Japanese initially, I don't think the Japanese deal with the Germans and coordinate an offensive against the Soviet Union. What I think they do is exactly what they did in 1919. For those of you not familiar, 1919 was during the Russian Civil War. Basically, right after the Bolshevik Revolution, there is no government of Russia. Either there isn't a government of Russia, or there's 4 or 5 different governments of Russia. Take your pick. And what the Japanese did, so all of the Western powers, Britain, France, the United States, Italy, and Japan, all sent troops to protect our munitions and supplies and friends, because we were technically in a war on the same side as Russia at this point against Germany. That was the excuse used, and you had troops on the ground fighting Soviet forces right up until 1919, 18 to 19. And basically the reason the British, French, and Americans sent troops into Eastern Russia is to stop the Japanese from taking it over, because they came in with a bunch of troops and started treating it like one of their colonies. if you don't have other forces around, and if you have a collapse of Russia, which we can get back to, we're going to switch back to Europe in a second and talk about the possibility of that. But I think if that happens, that's when you see Japan get involved. So I just laid out something. I told everybody I'm out on a limb. That limb.
Here's something I want to throw out, Chris, because I think that you have a very good argument for why they would maybe not initially get involved. What I'm thinking about is the Japanese have half of Sakhalin Island at this point from the Russo-Japanese War, right? And yes, they turned south primarily because they had run into some issues, border skirmishes with the Soviets. Here's what I'm kind of processing, though. The Soviets are starting to get into a massive fight with the Germans in the West. They're going to be exporting resources to fight in the Western theater. I also think that most everything that happened in our timeline with regards to the Germans' interests and the Japanese interests as being anti-Soviet still happen in this timeline. So as I kind of threw out, didn't really develop it, as I just kind of threw out in the pre-podcast recording, or the pre-recording of the podcast, I basically said, I think Hitler would have a lot of incentive to basically try and get Japan to open up a second front in the East and say, hey, we're going to work on the West. You guys can kind of scissor in on the East. And Japan maybe rebuffs that at first, given their recent history. But there's another additional reason that I think the Japanese might end up actually taking that offer. And it's because of what you mentioned at the start of your talk there, Chris. And it's that we got France, we got the Dutch, we have these other powers that are in Southeast Asia at this point. They are not in the war. And I think, as valuable as those resources are, Japan might take a step back and say, okay, Britain isn't involved, Britain's not involved, France is not involved. Are we going to want to draw these colonial powers in to the conflict? Let's say, French Indochina is not very well protected. But regardless of that fact, the Japanese still have a bone to pick with the Soviets, big time. They want to go further than they did in the Russo-Japanese War. Personally, I feel if maybe they take a look at their options and they say, okay, if we expand south, we risk drawing in European powers that aren't already involved. If we go north, we have a friend in Hitler, you got a friend in me, to possibly do a lot of damage to their age-old nemesis. I think if I'm a Japanese leader at this point, I would take a look at that. I'd be salivating. I'd be like, you know what? We got Manchuria. Yeah, we might have had a couple losses against the Soviets in recent memory, but they're now more distracted. I think if we team up, we can get a lot more territory to the north. So that's going to be my pushback against that. But maybe that's what eventually gets them in the war
that's
on
what
Germany's side.
eventually happens.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I'd say. Reminding everyone how poorly the Soviet Union did in the Winter War. I mean, poorly. They were not doing well at all.
They got their butts handed to them by a few Finnish troops that hid in the snow and spoke Finnish.
Yeah, to this day, when the snow starts speaking Finnish, Russians run away.
Yeah.
And that one of the reasons for that is the purges.
Which would still be happening in this timeline.
Still happened in this timeline. Not only that, but we have right after this, basically Stalin kind of realized that the purges, especially of the military, may not have been the best idea. And a lot of the politically loyal officers who had been in charge of Finland were moved aside. And that's when you have Zhukov coming back from having beaten the Japanese. And they spent a year rebuilding the Russian military. You don't have that here.
So is this so? And I'm curious,
Mhm.
knowing that Russia is, I'm going to use the word depleted at this point
Mhm.
after the Winter War, and Japan is irritated.
Mhm.
Does Hitler have any reason to call? And in other words, we're not looking at a Stalin going, "Hey, we need a second front. Get a second front. Get a second front. I'm dying here." Germany has no reason to do that in this.
Even in our timeline, when Hitler was invading the Soviet Union, do you remember what he said? He said, "We just have to kick in the door and the entire rotten edifice will crumble." I don't think he approaches Japan. They haven't worked with Japan previously. They don't have shared enemies in the Western imperial powers. And by the way, you know the funny thing about when you make a deal with somebody to enter a war with you, they want something.
Always.
So let's not approach. I don't think Germany even takes the first step in approaching Japan.
Does Hitler get to the gates of, so here would be my thought,
Mhm.
and this is my question. Does Hitler get to the gates of Moscow at that point? And at that point, does Japan say, ain't no good conquering like a dead country to begin with?
So are we saying that Japan independently gets involved and launches their own theater? I can see that definitely being a possibility for sure.
Yeah, because
as opposed to them calling them up.
Yeah, didn't they hit Pearl Harbor without telling the Germans?
Oh, yes, they
Am
did.
I remembering
But
that right?
yes, and they were.
So they have a tendency to just kind of go off.
That.
And I think they might approach Germany in this timeline if they were thinking about going in a directly opposite. They might at least make some noises, but I don't think there'd be a whole lot to it.
Yeah,
they just start going.
Like, I think in this circumstance, Germany doesn't feel the need to approach them.
Mm-hmm.
I think Germany is successful in, I keep wanting to call it the East, but in Western Russia. And basically, once Stalin disappears, because I don't think, I think when the government flees Moscow, something happens to him. And, for the next 40, 50 years, people are debating what actually happened to him. There is some form of government reformed. That's when the Japanese jump on them. And it's without German approval. It's without German acquiescence. But the fact is, if you look at, what is Germany doing here? Germany wants basically Western Russia, picture up to the Volga, and the Caucasus, the Caucasus. They want Baku.
A lot of oil there.
Exactly. That's why they do it.
So
Japan.
Does Japan negotiate to get? Okay. This is why Japan makes the arrangement, because the Japanese navies, they may not have wanted Indochina as much, but they wanted the Philippines. They had a very big view that the Pacific was theirs. It was their the Pacific. That part of the Pacific was destined to be a Japanese lake. And the one thing the Navy needed to make all of that happen was oil.
And the single most important conquest of everything they did in December 41 and early 42, the single most important is the one nobody talks about, which was Indonesia.
Yep.
And the oil there.
The oil is what they were after. That was the whole thing.
And I think once basically you have a once you have a Soviet collapse, the Japanese jump into into, I don't quite want to say Siberia, but into Eastern Russia. Siberia is kind of a deindustrialized wasteland in between the two. Except there's a pipeline running.
Who owns Indonesia at this point?
Netherlands.
The Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
And in this timeline, we do not have a Western theater.
Correct.
The Dutch are not conquered.
Correct.
By the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But
Germans, however...
Japan makes the deal with Germany. Japan makes a call and says, hey, sounds like you're doing really well. Glad to hear it. Let me take some more Russian troops off your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another thing to keep in mind. Yeah, I want oil. Give me some oil. By the way,
not only do I want oil, now you as Germany might actually have enough to trade.
Yep.
You actually have enough, because up until now, you don't have enough to actually play that game.
Yeah.
Exactly. But here's what I'm getting at. Who owns the eastern half of a certain island next to Indonesia? Papua New Guinea is owned by Germany at this point.
No, it's not.
Is it not? Am I misremembering my facts there?
That was a colony that was given to Australia.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I was going somewhere with that, but Chris fact checked me live on air, so I'll take that. But I think the point remains is that there is significant incentive at that point for not the coordinated attack of the Soviets, but Japan jumping into the party once the Soviets are kind of knocked down by a peg or two or five by the Germans in the West.
And then they can go back to China. And that's what they do. If they are getting oil from if they're getting oil from Germany, by the way, the Japanese are still buying American oil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no embargo.
Much more pleasantly. Yeah. Much more pleasantly buying American.
So I don't think they have that incentive to go south. At this point, they have the incentive to finish China.
Yeah. And with Britain not tied down with a Western invasion, they don't have the problems trying to get through North Africa and India to get to Southeast Asia. So they're the big dogs knocking on the back door in the South, and the Japanese are not going to want to go up against a full-strength Imperial Navy and Royal Marines.
Nope.
Now,
Chris has a smile on his face, which means he's about to upset the apple cart.
Absolutely. As a nation that starved for oil for so long, I think the German position in the Caucasus offers them some very interesting possibilities.
Okay, I think
For
I see
those of
where
you
you're
following along, Dylan almost did a spit take.
I think I see where you're going here.
Okay, go Dylan.
Well, so the immediate things that, just without even knowing where you're going, the immediate things that are jumping out are Turkey and or Iran and or India once you start getting into that ballpark. Or maybe now's time to get revenge for 1918.
What do you mean?
I mean, Alsace-Lorraine might be changing names again.
Well, yeah, that's where we're going.
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw it out to everybody else. In the summer of 1942, when the Germans are driving on Baku, Hitler made the comment that my generals have no concept of the economic aspects of warfare. He has a very narrow front in Alsace-Lorraine, which I think at this point, especially given that the French and British sat there and let him take over the East, he's going to spend maybe the rest of 40, maybe 41. I could see him taking 41 to consolidate, to develop Baku, especially, by the way, develop the pipelines and the capacity to actually exploit that. I don't even want to, I mean, what does that do to the size of Germany? Easily triples, quadruples it. It's going to take a little bit of time to digest this. However, I think he's sitting there looking at a map and saying, we have been an oil-starved country. I'm worried about the Royal Navy. I'm worried about the French army. But all of those things run on one thing, and that's oil. And I think he's in a position in the Caucasus. I'll take it a step further. I think I know what he does. Looking at our timeline, and I don't see anything changing here. When war is declared somewhere, the French sit behind the Maginot Line and shoot leaflets into Germany, telling them that it would be a bad thing to go to war with them. Dylan's laughing, but that's basically what they did. But, so, hey, how many divisions does it take to defeat leaflets? I think, in our September campaign, Hitler gambled, and the generals were very worried about if Britain and France actually decided to try and fight. They didn't. He didn't think they would. In this circumstance, I'm beginning to believe maybe he doesn't believe they will. Evan.
Yes.
Off podcast, before I sidelined all of it, you were talking about the importance of the Middle Eastern theater.
Yes.
I was
angling to get into it.
Do you remember what happened in August 1941 in the Middle Eastern theater?
I am not recalling off the top of my head.
Is that
that's right. That's right. Yes. And wow, that's actually really interesting to think, because I'll just throw in here what I said a little bit pre-podcast. But in our timeline, essentially, because Hitler basically recognized, hey, I need a lot of that dino fuel to fuel my operations. And ideologically, a lot of the Middle East shared, his disdain for the Jews. So he kind of ran, and Italy too. He and Italy basically kind of in the Middle East were running a lot of these like covert propaganda. Hey, let's trade for oil. Let's be on friendly terms sort of things. And the state of the Middle East at that time was very open to that, because Britain and France, the two main colonial powers in that area, hadn't done a lot recently. And there was the beginnings, the seeds that were being sown of like pan-Arab movements at this time. So Hitler kind of exploited that and said, hey, we got a common enemy. We have a common enemy in the Jews. Why don't you guys help give us some oil? And that was basically one of the biggest things that happened. And as Chris just mentioned, the Iraqi coup happens in 41, which was, if I remember correctly, not so covertly backed by the Germans.
In our timeline. It wasn't. One, you're correct in that they did not covertly. They did not do it very covertly. They also didn't do a whole lot to support it.
No.
Basically, August 41, this is maybe 4 months after Crete, after Greece fell. They have some bases in the kind of Eastern Mediterranean area. They wound up flying some small arms, rifles, to the rebels via Vichy, Syria. They couldn't make it all the way in one hop. They landed in Syria and then flew over into Iraq. This is actually what triggered the British to invade Vichy Syria and shut that down. In our timeline, in the new timeline we've created, I think that the key person in this plan is Ayman al-Husseini, who the British had named the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in the 1920s. He led the Palestinian Arab uprising in 1936, which was put down by the British. I think we've done an episode talking about a little bit of that. He is also, after that gets put down, he flees to Germany and becomes an SS general. Yeah, you look at me like that, Dylan. No, I'm not kidding.
I know. I just like, what are the odds? Like, this story just keeps getting weirder.
So he actually led a division of Bosnian Muslims doing anti-partisan and SS things in the Balkans. Yeah, SS things. In our timeline, as a religious leader, as a Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, he's got a lot of pull.
Oh, he has tons of pull.
Mm-hmm. And I think he is in Germany floating around, and rather than basically sending him to Iraq on a wing and a prayer, they actually exploit it and actually instigate some kind of another Arab rising in the Middle East, which will precipitate, one, disorganization of the British forces there, two, allow a very easy come right down into Mesopotamia, into southern Iran, and once you have Basra and you have Ottoman, I believe, southern Iran, hey, where do the Allies get oil? Because the entire Middle East is now under your control.
Yeah.
Well, there's one place left, but in our timeline,
Texas.
Yeah, pretty
That's
much.
the only place left.
Yeah, but in our timeline, the problem is in our timeline, America got drug into World War II kicking and screaming only through Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt's unannounced, unrestricted warfare against German submarines was in the North Atlantic was very, very, it was kept as quiet as could be because America was, we were all bought in on pacifism. Our oceans are going to protect us. No one's going to mess with us, kind of thing. So, do we sell oil to England and France?
Japan doesn't go south. Japan does not Pearl Harbor, and Germany and Japan are not really in a formal alliance. And
Japan was
in mind as well.
Japan took advantage of the situation.
Yes, exactly. But keep this in mind as well. We declared war on Japan. Germany declared war on us.
Right.
I feel that there was a very real possibility, even in our timeline, that we would have just focused on the Pacific if we could. Hitler basically went gung-ho and was like, you know what? I'm going to help back up my boys in Japan. I'll declare war on America. Even to this day, people are like, why exactly did you do that, man? Why did you pick a fight? No idea. But it stands to reason, I think, that the Americans in this time, in our timeline and in this timeline, are basically equally as pacifistic. The key difference is that there is basically nothing that drags America into this new timeline's conflict. And I would say they're kind of an oil dealer for any willing buyer, I would say.
So let me say a couple of, I just blew some stuff up and I know it.
That's what you do best on this show, Chris.
I think the United States loves to sell oil to Britain and France. The thing is, in our timeline, because France falls so quickly and all of their ports on the Atlantic become U-boat bases, the war in the Atlantic takes on a completely different character. When if the German army is busy about, picking other places and realizes the French aren't going to do anything to them, I think the German Navy isn't as much of a threat to British shipping and therefore American commerce. Now, there's Neutrality Act issues about the ability of American flagged ships to sell war products or to transport war products.
We let everybody flag whatever you come over and get it, we'll sell it to you.
Yeah, Roosevelt played a lot of games with that.
Yeah, but that keeps us neutral.
But like you were saying, there's not as many ships being sunk because the U-boats don't have that easy access to the Atlantic.
Okay. So where does Britain fall into this?
Where does Britain fall?
Yeah.
Well, it's a very good question.
That's what I'm wondering.
We don't get it Dunkirk.
No, not yet. Not yet.
Right?
No. Is Britain very concerned about not so vague German noises in the Middle East at this point? And because what's something that we also haven't really determined is Churchill still going to come in? Because Chamberlain, how long was Chamberlain around for?
So
I forget.
Chamberlain came in at the end of 1936 after the abdication crisis, which still makes zero sense as to why Baldwin had to resign. However, he came in 1936 and he only left in April he left the day that Germany invaded the Low Countries. And he had to resign because of the failure of Norway. Does not happen. The question now is, I think, one, what I think, but I wish we had one of our Anglophiles on here because I'm wondering. Remember, this was still a government that was elected in 1934, I want to say. They're due to hold an election if something doesn't fall. The election was postponed until July of 1945 only because of the war. But if Britain's not in a war, I think at some point we're going to have an election.
Yep.
And that if we want Churchill to come in, that's how. Hey, by the way, let's talk about a couple of things. One, Churchill, who is Churchill's big enemy? Because it could be Hitler, it could be the Soviets who are defeated. Oh, by the way, as First Lord of the Admiralty, you're the person that decided to take the entire British fleet onto oil. How good a decision does that look right now?
Well,
exactly.
I'm gonna throw a whole other monkey wrench into this, man.
Yeah.
Do it.
So Germany has now defeated Russia. They let Japan have a little thing. Germany's controlling the oil, right? Hitler still needs living space.
No, he doesn't.
No, because he's got it in Western Russia.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's got everything basically to the Urals.
Does he think about making the move west? He's stronger now than he was when he went west with us. And he doesn't have that annoying little distraction in the east. Oh, and by the way, since you brought it up, Chris, there was this minor little abdication thing that happened. And someone still wanted to be king and happened to be a Hitler buddy.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that possibility.
So, one, I think you could only change the British king if you actually take London.
Agreed.
And I don't think that's happened yet.
I don't think there's anything to suggest that would happen.
I think what he may be what he may be doing is, so are you guys familiar with Persia? Have you ever heard of Persia? What is Persia? What is Persia known as today?
The graveyard of empires?
No, that's
well, that's actually Afghanistan, but
yeah,
Yeah.
it's Iran.
Yeah,
Do you want to
Iran.
know?
Yeah.
Do you want to know why they made that name change?
Well, that was in
When
the
they made
79,
the name change?
That was in the 79 revolution, right?
No, it wasn't.
No.
No,
That was
It
in
happened
the
way
coup that
before
put the
that.
Shah on the throne?
That was before. That was
Oh.
the
That was during World War II, if I remember correctly, because
that was in the
Tehran is
19
where the last big conference was held.
that was in
Yes,
the 1930s.
I do remember the conference. Yeah. Oh, okay.
The Shah you're thinking about, Reza Pahlavi,
Mm-hmm.
was put on the throne in 1942 by a British-Russian coup because his father was very pro-German.
Pro-German. Mm-hmm.
His father changed the name of the country from Persia to Iran. Do you know what Iran means? Land of the Aryans. He changed the name of the country to sound
Aryan?
more
Yeah.
pro-German. And in 42, the Russians and British in our timeline cooed him, took him out for his son because they needed Iran as a lend-lease supply track. In this timeline, he's pretty safe in
I was going to say
Iran.
there's no Soviets around to coup anymore.
And I think
the British aren't going to do anything on their own.
Well, the British are gone.
Not in this, yeah.
Not here.
And in this scenario, I think what Hitler's done a lot. And what I think is once he secures Iran, southern Iran, he probably takes Basra areas, the important areas over there. And I think he might look at his cousins in Britain and say, what are we fighting over?
Mm-hmm.
Let them buy American oil. Let them take oil from Mosul even. He has all he needs, and he needs to digest the East.
Yeah.
So he needs time. So your thinking is that our thinking is that Hitler needs time to Germanize, I'm going to use that word, that Eastern territory into, in his words, nowhere condemning it, but I'll use it because it will clarify things. He needs to deal with that nagging little Jewish problem in Russia. Don't mean anything bad by that, but in other words, he wants to.
That's going to be his focus.
That'll be his eventual
not just
focus.
that, his Slavic problem too.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep.
They were as much a victim as the Jews were during that entire piece.
They were going to be. They were next.
They were on the list.
They were next on the list. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, so maybe that's the question. Maybe that's because I've been trying to figure out in all this, do the Allies ever come in at all and address anything? And maybe that's when is if Hitler's.
Sorry, go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah. So Hitler's digesting the East, but he also has 3 Baltic countries that still exist that didn't in our timeline. Because if he invades in March, April of 1940, Stalin doesn't force elections in Estonia, Latvia, and the third one that I can't
Lithuania.
believe.
Lithuania.
So those countries are still going to exist. They're probably going to be a significant amount of German pressure on them, but strictly speaking, they will exist where they didn't in our timeline because they were in the USSR. So does that become a bridge point for Britain and France?
I think Iran, which already has a German sympathetic Shah on the throne, because in our timeline when I was referencing 1979, it was a very Western allied Shah that was kind of the source of all the consternation and really animosity, I guess you can say, that kind of helped foment the 79 revolution. In this timeline, we still have a pro-German Shah on the throne. I am going to assume that the Iraq revolution is not only also successful in this timeline, but also probably a little bit more German supported and a little bit more of a bigger thing that happens. So I think perhaps once the West sees, all right, Germany is digesting the East, they got Baku, they're trading, with Japan, establishing this, basically two-partite axis, I guess you could say. It's not really formalized, but the relationship solidifying there. They have these important allies in the Middle East as well, in Iraq and Iran. That could be, and I don't know if there's any specific event that touches off, perhaps the acquisition of Basra. I'm not sure.
I think
maybe that's what causes the West to finally go, okay.
I think it's the Iraqi revolt.
Okay.
I think the Iraqi revolt.
All right, so
interesting.
So let's kind of tie a bow on where we are and about what year we think we are here.
Okay.
For our good listeners, because I think that would be a good place to go. So we are, I'm going to make a guess here, 43, 44 by now.
I'd say I'm generous. I'll say 44.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in 1944. The Soviet Union does not exist because the eastern part of it is Germany now. The western part of it is Japan.
The western part is Germany, eastern part is Japan. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Flip it. I always get, once you get to there, I get confused with
yes, valuable German Siberia, just what they wanted.
There you go.
Yeah.
So they've got that. Germany is also
has a defense pact with Iran.
Okay. And Palestine is still Palestine. Egypt is still under British control.
British protectorate, yeah.
Protectorate. Italy and Spain are still buddy-buddy and kissy-facey together, but haven't really been involved in anything together yet at this point. So let me make sure I got who am I missing? Oh, the United States. We're very pacifistic in our little world, except we're willing to sell oil to anybody who's willing to buy it.
Well, and
go
if
ahead, Dylan.
So this is more setting something up for what it seems like we're gearing up for a potential part 3, which is if it's 1944, we may have a
president.
Exactly.
This
Because FDR
doesn't
run for a third or fourth term, I think.
Well, that's the question. Did he run in 40?
I think he would have run in 40.
I think he would have run in 40.
Because there was enough instability.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do not
but
think
there's I don't think he would be running in 44.
And by the way, I'm just going to throw this out. And we can definitely circle back to this one. There was no wild-haired, crazy German scientist that wrote a letter to FDR that said, we ought to think about doing something.
No, there absolutely was. No.
You still think that happened? Okay.
Are you kidding me? Okay, let me throw this out there.
Okay.
You guys remember this movie called Oppenheimer? One thing that could have crystallized the Western scientist to concentrate on their research, it was destroying the Soviet Union. Many of them were leftist.
Yep. And Germany had lots more time and lots more research available to them. and they picked up a few scientists along the way.
I was going to say, they're picking up a bunch of scientists from the former USSR in this as well.
So this might play into intriguing moments after 1944.
So we can set up a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
I like it. Possible
very,
part
very
3
interesting
in the works.
Crossroads that we find ourselves in.
Yes,
in
1944
in this time.
I find it funny that for an episode that is focusing on part 2 of Sanjurjo living, we barely
did not
even
talk about
him.
Spain.
We barely talked about Spain.
I have a feeling they'll come back in part 3, so we can call it a Sanjurjo sandwich.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, I like that a lot. There we go.
All right. Any last words from anybody?
No, I think. No. I mean, I think that's it. I think we've about well covered it.
I actually have one last thing to throw out.
Okay.
All right. What you got?
If we have a German west part of Russia, the Soviet Union, and a Japanese east part, I'm thinking there is a very intriguing possibility for Siberia basically becoming a no man's land, as if it already wasn't one. But like politically, who is going to want to send the troops or the capital to actually occupy it? But in our timeline, Stalin basically gives, the Soviets had a belief that pretty much any ethnic group or people group needed their own territory, their own homeland, right? So what if, and this is just something that literally flashed across my mind like lightning, right? As Robert said, does anybody have any last words? We have a little interesting area of the Soviet Union in our timeline in Eastern Siberia, I believe, called the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, if I remember correctly. What if Siberia Chris is shaking his head. Chris is like, I don't like where this is going.
No, but I'm going to let you develop your idea, and then I'm going to shoot it to pieces.
Well, I've got a theory. I've got a side theory of this. Continue.
Yes, but in the show that actually started me getting into alternate history, The Man in the High Castle, the Rocky Mountains are basically a neutral zone between Germany and Japan. What if, a little past the Urals just becomes essentially a neutral zone between the two? Because frankly, Germany's trying to digest what they got in the West. Japan is giddy over what they got in the East. Nobody really wants to take any resources to claim that whole big giant chunk of ice in the middle. What if that's where a lot of the war refugees end up going? And we have a Jewish autonomous area in Siberia.
The most likely political entity to survive, I would say, the Soviet Union would be a military dictatorship. I'm going to throw Zhukov out there. It's pretty well known as a general to kind of hold together whatever was out there. Right up until 1933, what was the most anti-Semitic country in the world?
Soviet.
That's the Soviets.
Yeah,
Russia.
Yeah.
And I think this area may be very welcoming to Slavic refugees, but those refugees want absolutely nothing whatsoever given to any kind of Jewish homeland. And let's also say, not necessarily Zhukov himself, but the Russian officer class, even after everything they have been through, and frankly, Zhukov probably brings back a decent number of white officers, they are not doing that either.
Well, actually, let me put a bow on that, Chris. My theory would be if it's set up that way, the peace treaty, I'm going to use that in air quotes loose, is we'll just live here, leave us alone. But any Jew that shows up, we'll give to you Germany and let you deal with them. We'll help out.
Maybe not in a treaty, but that's what's going to wind up happening. That is not that borderland is going to be for Slavs.
Okay. And I was reviewing my history of the Jewish autonomous oblasts. Basically, essentially what Stalin did was, hey guys, you're Jews, we'll give you a little piece of land in eastern Siberia so you can go do Jewish things. Jews get sent over there or emigrate over there, and then Stalin starts persecuting them for doing Jewish things.
Yeah. I mean, this literally was, he gave them their own cell block in Siberia. That's basically what that is.
Exactly. So I think I think I agree ultimately with what you guys have said. I just wanted to throw that out there as a harebrained idea that I was just cooking. I don't know what it was in what you said, Robert, that made me think about that possibility, but I'm just like, this little side tributary of the flow of history is is just something that has kind of always piqued my curiosity, and so I wanted to see if I can weave it in somehow.
Hey, good options, Chris. Anything else?
Not necessarily. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff I'm going to cook for the next episode. I think we know that much.
We've got a lot of cooking for the next.
I enjoy that Dylan sees me smiling on the video, and he just immediately starts shaking his head, knowing something's
here
coming.
We go again.
All right. So for Chris Coppola, Evan Buck, Dylan Holzmer, this is Robert Koshu, reminding all of our listeners, Dylan, that if they come across a fork in time, what should they do?
Take it.
Thank you, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.